The whole track chuckled when Matthew Cole rolled his flat silver homemade car onto pit lane. No flashy logos, no rich sponsors, completely bare bodywork nobody recognized. Snickers followed him, signing the roster next to guys with actual podium trophies. They even smirked at his 7-year-old kid hugging the fence holding up a homemade sign. Richard Vance, 4-time defending champ. He mocked him the loudest, full of pure arrogance. But nobody bothered listening to that raw motor firing up in the garage. Big mistake. Flashy crowds never listen, but they really should have. You and I are about to see what happens when quiet talent shuts an entire track up. Stick with me. Matthew completely ignored those other racing crews. He guided his rig straight to the edge of the bay, yanked the brake, and stepped out like a man who actually works for a living. Stepping out of a rig he had driven 100,000 miles without even blinking. 34 years old, rocking the kind of battered hands that proved his worth before he even spoke. Thick, hard calluses sat at the base of every finger. Deep oil grease lived under his nails that no soap was ever going to wash away. He rocked a faded navy work coat, zero name tag attached. His buddy Oliver hopped out, slamming a heavy toolbox onto the pavement without making a scene. 2 quiet guys, 1 machine, and absolutely zero flashy gear. Perched cross-legged on the truck roof, taking the scene in with huge brown eyes, sat a 7-year-old kid. Little Bonnie Cole sported a baseball hat at least 2 sizes too big for her. A deep, washed-out cherry red that proved it had been deeply loved for years. It rested so low on her brow she actually had to tilt her chin upward just to watch. Stitch it across the front of the crown, in totally faded thread, was the name Claire. She gripped a tiny homemade racing flag in both hands. Scrap paper taped onto a chopstick, spelling out GoDaddy in green crayon that slanted wildly and unevenly uphill. Matthew squatted down by car 47, feeling out the tire pressure on that front left side. Real mechanics don't even need a fancy digital gauge. He just pushed his thumb into the rubber, judged the firmness, and shifted right without even standing. Oliver quietly passed a wrench. Matthew cranked a bolt on the control arm exactly 2 turns, then held completely still. He leaned his ear right up to the cold hood, just sensing the silent metal. Amateurs stare at race cars, true talent listens to them. 3 years ago he was the top engineer at Vance Motorsport, a solid racing crew 40 miles up north. He grounded out there for 6 years. Year 2 he completely rebuilt their fuel injection from scratch, slicing 1.4 seconds off their laps. Sounds like nothing, right? But you and I know a single second on the track defines an entire career. Then Richard Vance bought the outfit with a leveraged buyout, gutting the whole operation in 1 quarter. Matthew got handed his walking papers on a random Tuesday. His wife Claire got rushed into the hospital that same Thursday, fighting a brutal complication those fancy doctors completely missed for several long months. She never made it back from that hospital ward. Little Bonnie was only 4. You see, that's the secret Richard Vance and his arrogant team never bothered uncovering. See, folks never knew Claire Cole used to rally race. That silver machine sitting in Matthew's garage wasn't just some solo project built from scratch. For 2 solid years before Bonnie came along, they built that beast together every single weekend. Sweating through late nights in a rented stall, sharing a busted space heater and a used welder. They never got to finish it. Matthew finished the job alone over the next 2 years, wrenching in that freezing garage with a baby monitor sitting right on his workbench. He didn't enter the Harmon Grand Prix just to chase a flashy trophy or victory. He showed up because of Claire's words. Sitting on a flip milk crate, grease smeared across her cheekbone, holding a cup of stone-cold coffee. One day we are going to race at Harmon together. Firing up that engine was the closest he'd ever get. Little Bonnie waved her flag once at the empty air, then just held it perfectly still. You and I know this track. The Harmon Grand Prix ran 40 years, backed mostly by family money. Lately it got bought up by the slick Harmon Racing Group, a massive corporate machine obsessed with event management, securing sponsorships, and turning raw drivers into marketable products. Scarlett Harmon was the chief executive now. She grabbed the wheel at 22 when her father passed away, leaving the empire without a real leader. Now 30 years old, she had ruled the company with an iron fist for 8 solid years. Over those 8 years, she never missed a single quarterly earnings target. Never issued a public apology, and honestly, not even once. Was she ever caught on camera at a track without wearing a tailored blazer and an icy composure that most people called heartless? The morning Matthew Cole finally dragged his beat-up trailer into pit lane. Scarlett sat high up in the VIP tower, scanning a quarterly financial risk summary. The report was 12 pages long. She was already on page 9. Sebastian Cross quietly placed a fresh coffee on her desk without needing an order. Her senior aide, 31 years old, completely calculated in every single move, down to the exact temperature she demanded for her morning coffee. He unlocked his tablet and swiped through the daily administrative race items. Final entry list for the event, he announced. 12 drivers confirmed. 1 independent. Scarlett turned the page, name Matthew Cole. Sebastian hesitated for a fraction of a second, barely a pause. No corporate sponsors, no official team, and absolutely no competitive record. Scarlett kept reading, any rule violation, then he races. She flipped to the next page. Sebastian slowly lowered his tablet. Working for her for years taught him something crucial. The dead silence she left behind was often way more telling than the actual words she spoke aloud. She completely shut this conversation down, but the second he dropped Matthew Cole's name, something definitely shifted. Her body went completely rigid, just barely enough for anyone to catch. Sebastian caught it, but he definitely wouldn't pry. He knew better than to ever ask. Stick with me here. He simply made a mental note to pull Matthew's background file before lunchtime. 40 minutes later, Richard Vance strutted right into the VIP lounge. Walking like a guy who's tasted victory so often he actually thinks he's just naturally superior, completely forgetting that real wins only come from sweat and dirty hands. He was 38 years old. He'd stolen first place here 4 times recently, but you and I know today is about to look very different. You and I know the type, flashy racing jacket shaking Scarlett's hand. He had that fake rehearsed swagger, trying way too hard to look natural. Good morning, Richard, Scarlett greeted flatly. Morning. He sat uninvited, oozing arrogance. I see you let a mechanic enter the pro race. Scarlett didn't flinch. We have an open registration process. Richard just smirked. Of course we do. He grabbed the coffee Sebastian hadn't even offered him. I'm just saying, when a guy shows up with groceries and a socket wrench, asking to race against seasoned professionals, it really says a lot about the current grid's quality. A calculated pause, or the quality of your motorsport standards. Scarlett just stared at him for one dead, silent second. The track standards are mine to set. Richard raised both hands lightly, a fake, innocent little gesture that somehow screamed he meant absolutely every single insulting word he just said. He stood up, adjusted that expensive jacket, and strolled toward the window. Once his back was finally turned, Scarlett stared down at her document, totally unblinking. She stared blankly at the bottom of the page. The words were there, but she wasn't reading a single one. Instead, she was picturing the past. The painful termination order she signed right after taking control of Vance Motorsport. A single piece of paper that crossed her busy desk as item 14 of 23. A corporate restructuring list she had blindly signed, without ever reading the individual. Names. There were 61 names, and she was only 22, trying to run a massive racing company for the very first time. Plus, 22 other urgent documents were piled up waiting right after it. She finally turned toward the window. Down in the pit lane, she spotted a guy in a faded navy jacket, crouching by an old silver car tweaking the rear suspension. Right beside him, a little girl wearing a red cap quietly refolded her paper racing flag. Scarlett watched them for 3 heavy seconds, then forced herself to look away. The mid-morning driver press conference kicked off inside a cramped building right by the main grandstand. 11 pro drivers stood there, lined up in flashy team colors, posing perfectly against a backdrop plastered with rich sponsor logos. Then there was Matthew, standing way at the far end in that worn navy work jacket. He had scrubbed his hands clean, but his thumbnail still showed some engine grease. He just stood firmly grounded, weight even on both feet, arms hanging loose and totally relaxed. Let's be real. That's exactly how real talent stands when they aren't performing for anyone. Naturally, Richard Vance grabbed the podium microphone first. Before he even mentioned the actual race event, he shot a slow, deliberate glare down the line toward Matthew. The kind of arrogant look designed to make the whole room stare. The room took the bait. Who let the shop foreman in? Richard sneered. He didn't even have to shout. He kept it casual and quiet, which honestly made it worse. He knew he held the power. Nervous chuckles rippled through the media pit. That cowardly kind of laughter from people who aren't quite sure it's funny, but are too scared to be the only ones staying silent. Matthew didn't even flinch once. He refused to give Richard attention. He stared at the back wall, his expression perfectly stoic. You and I both know the track will do his talking. A rookie reporter from some local motorsport outlet stepped up. Her press lanyard still looked crisp. She cornered Matthew the second the formal PR nonsense finally wrapped up. She shoved a digital recorder forward. Mr. Cole, do you have any team sponsors for this race? No, a pit crew? 2 people. The reporter just hesitated. Do you honestly think you have a real chance competing here? You and I know talk is cheap. Matthew just stared at the reporter's recorder. I'm not here for a chance, he told her plainly. I am here to race, she wrote that down. That wasn't the flashy soundbite she wanted for her neat little motorsport article. She blinked at her notes, looking back up, but Matthew was already gone. He had work to do. Up in the front row of the spectator section, Scarlett sat silently, Sebastian just 3 empty seats away. She watched that whole media circus without a single reaction. When Richard ran his mouth at the mic earlier, her face stayed completely stone cold. She just twisted that silver ring on her right hand, a tiny piece shaped like a gear. Simple metal, 1 clockwise spin with her thumb and then dead stop. Sebastian tracked her movement but stayed completely quiet. Out by the rusty truck, little Bonnie was eating a sandwich on the tailgate when Matthew finally emerged. She hopped down off the steel, bolted over, and buried her face right into his side. He rested a heavy hand on her hair. They were being mean. She mumbled, Some people just are. Are you sad? Matthew knelt down to her eye level. No. Bonnie searched his tired face with that raw, unfiltered stare of a kid who has spent her whole life with one parent, knowing exactly when he's faking it. You make a face when you get sad, she whispered. You think you hide it, but you really don't. He held her gaze. Slowly his mouth twitched, not quite a grin, just the quiet start of one. That subtle look a guy gets right before deciding if he should actually show some real emotion. First time the man had dropped his armor since pulling his old rig into this flashy paddock. 40 feet away, the spotlight chasing Richard Vance stood soaking up attention from hungry reporters. He noticed the kid. He noticed the cameras pointing right at her. He strutted right over, palms spread wide. Flashing a fake television grin, he dropped down beside her, angling his body perfectly so the press caught both his good side and the little girl. Bonnie stared at him, stone-faced. What is your name, little sweetheart? Richard cooed. Bonnie, is that your daddy over there? Yes, he is pretty brave showing up here today. That classic fake tone adults use when they're actually performing for the cameras right behind them. Bonnie stared him down. You're the one who fired him. She stated it wasn't angry at all. You and I know kids don't care about PR. She just dropped the cold hard facts. You are not his friend. That plastic smile froze for a painfully long second. Then he stood up, gave the press a fake nod, and quickly retreated back into the main building. A trackside photographer slowly lowered his heavy camera lens. A racing journalist quickly scribbled down some notes. But a third guy had already snapped the golden shot. The photograph catching Matthew kneeling in dirt, his daughter's tiny hand resting on his rough jaw. Her big red cap shining in the sun, father and daughter ignoring the whole chaotic world. It hit the internet instantly. By sunset, everyone knew that quiet dedication was the real face of Car 47. Stick with me, because the real test came during morning qualifying, under thick gray clouds threatening to wash out the track. The first sector was damp, but the track dried up from Sector 2 onward. Richard Vance laid down the fastest lap time, 1 minute 40.23 seconds. His crew cheered with that practiced, flashy enthusiasm of people who expect everyone to watch. The gap back to the second-place driver was nearly a whole second. Matthew drove out 11th of 12. Oliver stood by the pit wall gripping a stopwatch he had owned for 15 years. He didn't completely trust the thing, but he never bothered replacing it. Listen closely. When Matthew left the pit lane and hit turn 1, the sound changed. It was not louder. Those other cars were loud, flashy turbocharged builds with big intercoolers, roaring just to show off for the grandstands. Car 47 was completely different. The exhaust tone was deeper and incredibly dense. It sounded the way a room echoes differently when built with solid brick instead of cheap, thin drywall. One circuit engineer was standing. Behind Sebastian at the timing tower, he raised his eyes from his laptop. He didn't say a word. He just watched the results on the track. Matthew clocked 1 minute 43.8, 1.5 seconds behind Richard on damp asphalt, running old tires that already had several hundred miles on them. But the driving line he took through the long, right-hand sweeper in Sector 2 wasn't anything like what the other drivers were doing. He went tighter on entry and wider leaving, a racing geometry that gave up the early apex to guarantee maximum exit speed. It's the kind of quiet move that loses a tenth in the corner, but easily gains you 3 down the straight. Those flashy drivers had used the standard line they always used, simply because it usually worked out well. Let's look closely here. Matthew picked a different line because he viewed that corner like a true engineer and realized the popular approach was flawed. Sebastian had actually been filming that lap on his phone. He carried that footage straight upstairs, dropping the phone right onto Scarlett's heavy desk. She watched the video once, then she played it again. She placed the screen face down on the wood and stared out the window for 4 seconds. After that, she stood up and walked out of the tower, without telling Sebastian where she was heading. She found Matthew standing behind car 47, quietly studying the rubber wear on that left rear tire. He was crouched down with his forearms resting on his knees. He wore that deep, focused look of a guy silently battling a mechanical problem that simply refused to cooperate with him yet. Oliver stood right beside him, scribbling something into a notebook. Scarlett stopped 2 meters back. "You built that intake system yourself," she said. It wasn't exactly a question, but it wasn't a standard statement either. It floated in that narrow space between. Matthew finally looked up. He gave her that calm, unhurried focus of a man deciding instantly if a conversation is actually worth his time, and then commits entirely if it actually is. He stared at her just long enough to make his assessment. "You already know the answer," he told her. "You're the CEO. You definitely had that technical inspection report sitting on your desk by 8 o'clock this morning. I want to hear it directly from you." He stayed quiet for a second. "Yes, took 2 years. Scarlett examined the race car, scanning the custom intake manifold glowing through the engine grille, the unique housing, and those non-standard feed lines. We both know why. She looked at it like any undeniable result. She treated his machine like just another engineering document to dissect, checking first principles, refusing to judge the build without hard evidence. It is a volumetric efficiency modification," she said. "You changed the plenum geometry." Matthew stood dead still. "You know intake engineering." "I know a few things." Her voice was flat, totally closing the door. She stared at the old car, searching for flaws, then eyed him. "The inspection team cleared it completely." "I know. Then you will race tomorrow." She turned around. He let his work speak, adding absolutely nothing more. Oliver just watched her walk off, staring at Matthew in absolute stunned silence. Right then, little Bonnie jogged across the crowded pit lane, clutching a half-eaten apple in her hand. She scrambled right up the side of the battered car, perching on the sill. She locked eyes with Scarlett, who had frozen in her tracks almost accidentally. "Is our car pretty?" Bonnie asked the woman. Scarlett just stared back. The young girl looked back with absolute seriousness. She held the apple aside, demanding real respect for the machine. "Yes," Scarlett replied. Just one word, totally stripped of her usual arrogant corporate voice. She used the raw, honest tone reserved for when performance stopped and truth began. Bonnie nodded, totally satisfied, and took another bite. "Let's dig into the past." That evening, Sebastian sent Scarlett an old employment file. Just 2 short pages. The real story was buried right near the bottom. Reason for firing, structural changes, executive authorization. Authorization signatures, Harmon. Scarlett stood motionless inside the luxury hotel elevator across from the race circuit, gripping her phone tightly with that old document glaring on the screen. She forgot to even press the button for her floor. The elevator waited. The heavy doors stayed open. She stared at her own signature at the bottom of a ruthless corporate choice. a choice she barely remembered, ruining a brilliant builder she ignored until yesterday. She finally pushed the floor button. The metal doors slid closed. Let's see how the establishment plays. At 11:17, while Matthew grabbed coffee, a rival named Derek slipped into car 47's garage. He wore a fake maintenance uniform and a standard staff lanyard. He spent 7 quiet minutes inside the bay making 2 cowardly modifications. He tweaked the thermal regulation valve on the cooling circuit so Matthew's engine would slowly overheat right at the point of maximum sustained driving load, somewhere right between lap 7 and lap 9. Then he loosened the front right wheel carrier bolt just enough to survive 8 hard laps of raw, demanding track speed, only to snap completely on the 9th lap under brutal lateral stress in the fastest sweeping corner behind the main circuit. He slipped out at 11:24. But the fool completely missed the security camera mounted above the door. Installed last season after some tool thefts, it was quietly recording every single second of his desperate little sabotage job. Matthew just could not sleep. He sat in the cramped hallway outside where little Bonnie was resting, just staring blankly at the floorboards for a while. Then he finally opened his wallet. Tucked inside, hidden behind his license and an old, faded fuel receipt he always kept around, was a single worn photograph. It was tiny, with a noticeable crease folding over one corner. You and I know true legacy endures. In it, a woman drove that exact same matte silver car parked inside a rough, bare concrete garage. She was laughing at something out of frame, grease smeared across her cheekbone. She had no idea anyone was watching her. Matthew snapped the picture quietly because right then she looked entirely real, like the genuine unguarded version we rarely let the noisy world see. He stared at that worn photo for a long time. Then he tucked it away. He sat there, hands resting loose between his knees, letting the quiet corridor swallow the noise in his head. Next morning, Oliver hit the garage before Matthew even showed up. He popped the hood for the pre-race inspection and just froze. He stared at the coolant circuit for 11 dead seconds. Dropping to the floor, he studied the right front carrier assembly. 4 more seconds of absolute silence. He dialed his number. The single dad answered on ring number 1. Matthew walked in. Oliver just pointed. Matthew dropped to a crouch. He checked the valve setting. No wear and tear, no accidental crack. Nothing a basic checkbox tech inspection would ever flag on paper. Pure, deliberate sabotage. He shifted to the wheel assembly, eyeing the compromised bolt. He did not touch a thing. Standing up, Oliver muttered, "Report it." Matthew stared at the ceiling. "We have zero proof of who. Start shouting now, and they'll just use their red tape to delay us. We're finished before we start, so we fix it? We fix it." No complaints, he just knelt by the valve. "Give me 15 minutes. You and I know cowards hide." At 6:41, inside a 4th-floor hotel room overlooking the racetrack, Sebastian Cross scrolled through the overnight security footage. A standard track review routine, looking for anyone dodging the spotlight. A strict routine they had locked down. After the major gear theft 2 seasons ago, he spotted the rat at 11:17, watched those 7 cowardly minutes. He noted the exit at 11:24. He recognized Derek's face instantly. Derek had blended into the technical crew for 3 years. Sebastian secured the file. He just sat there, hands folded, letting the dirty reality sink in. Without a word, he knocked on the adjoining hotel room door. Scarlett answered in 30 seconds flat, fully dressed, gripping her black coffee. Sebastian just held up his tablet screen, completely silent. She studied the footage, the timestamp, uniform, lanyard, and that brutal angle exposing the tampered front wheel assembly. "Who exactly does Derek answer to?" she asked. Sebastian kept quiet. Scarlett held his stare. "Vance Motorsport has paid him quietly on retainer for 2 seasons, Sebastian replied. "Completely off the books." Scarlett placed her cup on the nearest table. She stared out at the track. Down there, true mechanics were already grinding under garage lights. The morning hung heavy and quiet. "Do not delete that file," she ordered. "Keep your mouth shut." Grabbing her smartphone, she paced straight to the glass. "You and I know race day reveals the truth." The sky cleared into a hard, honest blue. From 6 in the morning, the track swarmed with pit crews, officials, vendors, and eager fans. By 9, grandstands hit half capacity. Come 10, the noisy crowd was packed extremely tight. No flashy VIP catering. Matthew shared breakfast with Bonnie inside the truck cab, yogurt for her, cheap protein bar and black coffee for him. Bonnie ate with serious, unbothered focus, staying completely mute until her cup was empty. "Are you scared?" she finally asked. "No," Matthew said quietly. She just looked at him. It was that exact same piercing stare from yesterday, the kind that cuts right through a brushed-off excuse. "You're making that face again," she said. "I'm really not." "You totally do." He stayed dead silent, then muttered, "Maybe slightly." Bonnie set her snack aside and reached into the back. Digging into a worn bag on the back seat, she fished out a faded red cap and offered it. "Mom always said this keeps you from getting lost." She shoved it onto his head. It hung way too low, completely blocking the man's vision. She claimed it worked for her like a charm. Matthew touched the brim. He didn't fix it right away, just traded a quiet look with Bonnie. She stared right back. Gently, he pulled the hat off and rested it on the seat between them. 40 minutes to green light. He strapped his race helmet on, handing the little red cap back. She pulled it onto her own head. Then she scrambled up to the metal railing, outlining the packed spectator zone. 6 feet from the pit lane entry, she gripped that cold bar tight. 20 minutes before the race began, Scarlett marched down from the tower. She strode down the pit lane with absolute focus. To anyone watching, it was just business as usual in this loud professional racing circus. Phone tight in her grip, her thumb swiping casually at a completely blank screen. A rare slip. Scarlett Harmon never held her tech without a real purpose. She marched to one specific garage bay and froze. Matthew was strapped into the cockpit, silently running dashboard diagnostics. Oliver stood near the battered rear wing, ticking his clipboard. Scarlett planted herself at the nose of car 47, waiting. Matthew simply glanced down. "You and I know that heavy silence. The kind a real driver uses to gauge exactly how much trouble is standing in front of him." "I know about the valve," Scarlett stated, "and that wheel bolt." The tension between them was thick enough to cut. "I know who snuck in last night," she added. "I've got the tape, plus 2 years of bank records tying Derek to Vance Motorsport." She took a breath. "I already made the call." Matthew held her gaze. "What call?" he asked. "Richard is pulling out today. A mechanical failure, according to the official motorsport event paperwork. But the real truth stays with me." Her tone was pure ice, the sound of someone who weighed exactly what to reveal and decided to lay all her facts on the table. "Derek is fired. The whole file hits the racing board tonight." Oliver stopped ticking boxes on his dirty clipboard. He stood perfectly rigid by the back end of the car. Matthew spoke up. "Why bring this to me yourself?" Scarlett took the question without flinching once. "Because I owe you this, maybe more." She let the silence hang heavily. "Because you've got 12 grid spots to chew through in 3 laps. Focus on the results, not whether this beat-up old car will break." She rested a hand on the dusty hood, barely gripping the metal. Just a light graze with her flat palm for 2 short seconds. A quiet sign of deep respect, real recognize real, no applause needed. Then she pulled back and walked off. Matthew tracked her for 3 solid seconds. Then he locked his eyes back on the dashboard. Time to make them listen. Scratched right into the dull finish of the housing. So small nobody ever bothered to look twice or ask about it, sat one single letter. C. I wrapped both hands tight around the steering wheel. 10 a.m. sharp, we launched under a blazing blue sky. 12 cars rolled out, but after the formation lap, only 11 actually made the starting grid. Car number 1, Richard Vance, pulled out late. They vaguely blamed it on technical issues. That sudden update sent a quiet ripple through the grandstands and scrambled the trackside reporters for a second. Then the green lights flashed, the motorsport event kicked off, and all eyes snapped forward. I started in 11th. Let's be honest, I spent those first 5 laps acting like an engineer before committing. I studied the pack, watched exactly where the shiny teams ahead were hitting their brakes. I tracked their drift in high-speed turns and noted exactly where they left the slow corners wide open. I mapped out where fresh tire rubber coated the asphalt. I calculated peak grip on the racing line, figuring out where I could take a totally unorthodox angle to catch it. My kid Oliver spoke over the radio, calm and perfectly steady, feeding me tire temperatures and lap sector times. By lap 6, I finally made my move. "Stick with me here. I ignored the obvious overtakes and straight-line speed tricks on the back section. That spot where every single driver at every circuit desperately tries to shave off seconds. I took them in the corners. I exploited the hole left by veterans running the same stale lines for 12 years, guys too scared to nail a late apex entering the tight chicane. I struck during that split second of pure driver hesitation. It always happens right before the hairpin turn, whenever they get boxed in by traffic on the left. 11th up to 9th, 9th to 7th. Oliver went quiet, he was just counting. During lap 7, my 47 car exited the second sector's final turn, diving into the long sweeping curve right before the main straight. I was already sitting in 5th. I was only pushing the build to maybe 70% of its max limit, still searching for the exact breaking point of our custom suspension tuning on this rough track, mostly because any smart engineer never demands full power from a machine until they know exactly what it can handle. I found that sweet spot midway through the turn. I felt the back tires lock in, no slipping, no breaking loose, just pure traction. Like a steel foundation hitting solid bedrock. At that moment I finally understood. A feeling you only get when you've built every single engine part by hand from the ground up. I knew what she could do. So I demanded every ounce of power. The exhaust note shifted. It hit right at maximum corner pressure, exactly when the custom intake system reached the load it was truly designed to handle, letting the massive airflow of our modified setup finally kick in. The motor's roar dropped half an octave, getting incredibly wide in. Its deep pitch, turning into something that barely even sounded like a normal track car anymore. It sounded raw, older, and a whole lot less complicated. Like a caged beast kept locked up for years, finally unleashed without a single restriction holding it. You and I know what happens next. 2,000 grandstand fans heard it together. The idle chatter died first, then nobody even moved. Suddenly, everyone glued to their timing screens finally snapped their eyes up to the track. Because that roaring engine noise made those digital displays completely irrelevant. Car 47 tore out of the sweeper at a pace the lap sensors logged. But from the grandstands, it looked like the motorsport timing software had just broken down. He blew past two flashy competitors on the straight and wasn't even touching the brakes yet. 5th, 4th, 3rd, Oliver stopped caring about the numbers. He just gripped the cold pit wall with both hands, totally mesmerized. Little Bonnie stood on the spectator barrier's second rail, feet hanging in the air, hands locked tight on the top bar, her cap pushed back. She kept shouting something over and over, completely drowned out by the screaming race engines. Her tiny knuckles were bone white. Scarlett stood near the edge of pit lane, 20 feet back from the wall, totally alone. Sebastian hovered behind her somewhere. She just stared at the asphalt. Her right hand dropped to her side, and her restless thumb, the same thumb that spent 2 days mindlessly spinning her gear-shaped ring in tiny circles without realizing it, was finally completely still. The little ring was completely still. You know that look when undeniable talent forces someone to drop their nervous habits? She just held it, unsure what to do with this sudden stillness. The final lap. He jumped from 3rd to 2nd right before the tricky technical section. A brutal chicane demanding 2 violently fast changes in direction. Right in succession, where the absolute fastest racing line stayed completely hidden. He cut inside where the flashy guys placed their cars, simply because they had been taught to leave a safety margin that Matthew knew perfectly well was totally unnecessary. Taking first place at the 300-meter board right before the final turn, because the guy in the lead hit his brakes out of sheer habit, and Matthew just flat out didn't. He took the final 400 meters to the checkered flag without ever lifting. Dead silence hung over the track for 1 full second after car 47 crossed the line. 1 single second where the entire grandstand absorbed this undeniable proof from their own eyes, seeing raw results that their arrogant expectations hadn't allowed them to process yet. Let's be honest, that was 1 second where 1,000 predictable races were destroyed by pure talent. And then the roaring applause hit. Matthew parked his beat-up machine in the finisher's area and just sat there for a minute, letting the engine idle. Oliver was shouting through the radio, but Matthew tuned out the actual words. He barely noticed the cheering crowd, treating the newfound attention like shifting weather outside. Just background noise wrapping around him. totally separate from what really mattered right then. He kept his eyes glued to the dashboard's lower left corner, staring at one single letter scratched deep into the metal. Gently, he rested his right hand over it. He sat quietly for 3 seconds, then finally popped the heavy door and climbed out. Oliver was sprinting across the asphalt before Matthew's boots even touched the ground, letting out a wild yell that wasn't even a word. Just raw, unstructured noise that perfectly captured the massive respect he earned today. He grabbed Matthew hard by both shoulders, yelling something twice that got completely swallowed by the screaming grandstand. Down by the spectator barrier, a tiny little figure wearing a red cap shoved her way through the stunned crowd. A track marshal lunged forward to stop the kid, but a woman standing near the barrier entrance just firmly shook her head once. Briefly, without breaking her gaze, and the track marshal stopped dead. Little Bonnie sprinted across the hot tarmac and hit Matthew exactly at waist height with both arms stretched out and refused to let go. Matthew wrapped both arms around his kid. He stood right there on the asphalt, in his worn racing suit, holding his daughter, letting the roar of the crowd wash over them. He didn't move for a long time. Later, once the podium trophies were handed out and the crowd had started clearing out, and the sports broadcasting crews packed up their cameras, Scarlett finally tracked Matthew down out by the motorsport VIP hospitality tents. He held his scuffed racing helmet in one hand. Little Bonnie walked right beside him, heavy-footed, leaning into his leg with almost every step she took, using her dad as an anchor, the way kids always do when they're absolutely exhausted but flat out refuse to admit it. Scarlett marched up to them, stopping short. "I owe you a real apology," she said. No long-winded corporate excuses. She just put the truth right out there. That termination order back in 2021, I signed it in a massive stack of papers. I didn't even read your specific file. A heavy pause. I really should have. Matthew just studied her face. "You know that doesn't rewrite any of the history." "I do. You know it doesn't fix those last 3 years. I know that too." She didn't break eye contact. "I still needed to tell you." He just stayed quiet. Finally, "All right, I heard you." He slowly turned that battered helmet over, staring down at it. Then he said, "You raced." It wasn't really a question. It wasn't just a statement either. "You and I know that exact tone. It's the silent respect between two people who spot real talent." A simple phrase pointing to the undeniable truth neither of them had actually voiced. Scarlett glanced down at her hand, staring hard at a tiny silver gear ring. 8 years ago, he pressed. "Do you miss it?" She finally looked up, and for the very first time in the 2 days since Matthew Cole learned her actual name. For the first time in those 48 hours, where the fierce Scarlett Harmon had existed. Somewhere close to the racer she used to be, long before becoming the suit she had to be, she just smiled. Not that perfectly engineered corporate smile she always flashed at press events and big meetings. Something entirely real. Something resembling the honest answer to a question she quit letting herself ask years ago. Every single day, she admitted. Bonnie suddenly tugged Matthew's hand. "Daddy, can we go get ice cream? We sure can." Bonnie faced Scarlett with that blunt honesty only a kid has. The kind who already figured out the score and won't bother hiding the results. "You should come," the girl said. "You helped out." Scarlett immediately looked at Matthew. He was staring off somewhere just past her left shoulder, wearing an expression and that wasn't exactly blank, but wasn't giving much away either. And the corner of his mouth showed that same quiet confidence from the truck cab earlier today. The spark of something new. A tiny shift that hadn't quite decided if it was going to happen. "All right then," Scarlett agreed. The three of them headed for the racing circuit gates, Matthew holding his helmet low, little Bonnie walking right between them, still gripping a paper racing flag in one hand while reaching up to gently wrap her fingers around Scarlett's wrist. Not her hand, just the wrist very lightly. It's the way a kid guides a grown-up who they know probably wouldn't make the trip on their own. Behind them, parked out on that empty asphalt, car 47 rested in the fading afternoon light, its silver paint grabbing the last sun rays. The massive grandstand sat completely quiet. Heavy sponsor banners fluttered just a bit in a fresh breeze blowing off the west. Deep inside the driver's cockpit, hiding quietly in the shadows where nobody could stare. A tiny letter carved right into the dashboard metal held perfectly still in the dark. "You and I know that feeling. The heavy silence of a machine that finally proved everyone wrong. Do.